So I want to welcome you all to the new year, and also to our January K through 12 chat. And I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Roxy Pack, who's going to lead you and as you share your stories about a New Year's resolution you made regarding your teaching, your classroom, or maybe something that you experienced at the beginning of the school year this year that you feel like's been a really positive change in your classroom. I think we all need inspiration as the new year starts, and we're always looking for ways that we can improve our student learning. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to you, Roxy.
All righty. Well, as Chris said, I hope that some of you had a chance to read the President's Corner from NCTM this last month, and when Chris and I were talking about what we wanted to do on this for this chat to get the year started, we were kind of struck by his message where he talked about New Year's resolutions and how difficult they are to keep, but also talking about kind of New Year's teaching resolutions and some of the things that he's tried to do to kind of have a positive impact on his teaching, and he shared a couple of those in that brief presidential address. And he also gave one piece of advice that I think is really good advice, which was, you know, when you're trying to make changes, don't try and do everything at once. Try and pick one thing that you can focus on, you know, and so he's been trying to pick one thing that he would focus on starting in January, because he said in September, I thought it was interesting, the beginning of the school year, it seems like a really long time to have to try and keep it up. But if he starts in January, he can usually make it till the end of the school year, and then it's not so hard. Then he's half done. Then the next year he's got half the work done, and it's easy to kind of bring it back into his classroom. So anyway, we thought we would just kind of start with a discussion and let you kind of share either a positive change that you have made in your classroom, or one that you're hoping to make, and share that with the group. So who would like to jump in first? And everybody jump at once. Henry, are you, or was that just I saw your box lit up?
I kind of coughed. Right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, Mary. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute this.
I know we forget.
I came in late. I just got home. We have a big snowstorm here, but I'm wondering if anyone talked about AI coming in, like anything with the new year with the AI chat bot or anything like that.
No, but we're just actually getting started and asking people to share kind of if they have a change that they've made or that they would like to make in their teaching for this year. But that the AI is I've been reading a couple of things about how that's changing how people are able to, well, even just the kinds of questions. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, and maybe the group will have something to.
It's like my best friend. I love playing with it. It's like anytime I'm going to take it out, if you have Google stock, I would just like sell it, because this thing's going to take over Google's properties. But I'm looking to do an activity with it next week in class, because when it first came out, I don't know how I got notified of it, but I went on it and I could get on it right away because it was the beta thing. Now,
do you want to just do you want to tell people what it is in case they don't know, in case they haven't heard of it?
Yeah, a company, and okay, so there's multiple things I was thinking about. It's chat bot, but I forget there's a letter in front of it. I forget what it is actually.
Chat GPT.
Yeah, Chat GPT. And so when it first came out like a month ago or something, you could just easily get on. They were like, just go ahead, ask it anything. And each day it learned more and more, and it learns, exponentially. So then I was like, whoa, I could just do anything. So I had it writing haiku. I was like, let me just try to have it write a haiku. And then after it wrote such good haiku, I was like, wait, could I write like a story for my daughter for a Christmas present? Like have it write a book. And so it did. It wrote a whole book. and you can just say to it like, all right, I don't really like the intro. Can you change the intro? And it just goes and rewrites the intro. And then I'm like, second paragraph, oh yeah, I don't like the way you're using the word, strength. Could you get a different word? You just talk into your phone and it just redoes it. And it's just the craziest thing. So after I finished that and I had the whole book, I said, well, I want it to be drawn, like I want it illustrated. And then the thing said, sorry, I can't draw. But I found out subsequently there are drawing ones. So then I started to ask it things about school. What are some great projects to do? And it did come up with some, a lot of them were what I would have already known, but some of them were really interesting. And then, so it's an artificial intelligence and machine learning. It gets smarter. Oh my gosh, sorry. I just got home from school, so my mind exponentially. And there's some videos of professors in college that in the beginning, like, because yesterday it was less smart than it is today, but in the beginning, the professors could twist it around on itself with questions on like philosophy or logic. But the next day their game was over because it already learned all that. So then they'd have to come up with a new puzzle for it to try to figure out. And so they've been chasing it, But then I emailed my administrator. I said, well, we got kind of a problem because I just wrote all these poems and I'm like a math person. I have dyslexia. I can't even read. So it's like, wow, I'm really good at this. I wrote books. I wrote poems. I'm like writing code. Like you can ask it to write code for you. I got all these projects, like whatever. So I said to my boss, this could potentially be a problem here. This is like right before Christmas. And everybody's like, nah, I don't, there's always something. I'm like, yeah, but this is different. This is like really different. It's not just like another math cheat thing where you hold your phone over it. I'm like, we can't catch this. Like we got to figure out a way to go with it, because I tried to put my poems into like, turn it in to see if it knew it. It didn't know it. It's all original. If I ask it 3 times in a row, every time it writes it different. So it can't get picked up. And more college coders are coming up with programs to try to detect it, but they're none of them are foolproof. All I have to do is put a different word or put a comma or something and you blow it. They don't think it's been seen before. So we can't fight it as educators. It's here. But it kind of bums me out that we were so blindsided, like, especially in the field of, a STEM field, like, why did we not know this was coming? Why all the way up the chain, were they so blindsided that they're getting papers? And it's really bad in college. People are turning in papers that are definitely not theirs, and professors are dealing with it. It's in high school too. They're doing it. But so next week, I want to put together a project. I just haven't figured out how to do it yet, but I want to have a project where they're going to use the AI and with a stats related element and try to see how I could use it in a class instead of, because it's kind of like the argument we're coming up with in education is it's like how people older than us used to think of the calculator, like, oh, everybody will be dumb because now there's a calculator doing everything. That's how they think of this, although this is really good because it's learning. So the calculator didn't learn. It's only as good as what the user did, but this is not the same. So that's what it is. It's a learning machine that learns. It can ask it anything. I ask it tons of stats questions. It's really fun. It's like I said, it's like my best friend. I'm like, oh, let me just get my bot out and ask it a question.
And is it giving you good answers, do you think?
Yeah, I haven't gotten, someone said that one of the math people said they put in a very complicated question. I got it wrong, but everything I've put in so far, it knows. So mine mustn't be so complicated. But yeah,
well, it would be really
amazing.
interesting. And Cynthia, put in that, it'd be really interesting what you can do with it. So far, most of the things I've heard have been very negative, that people are really worried, and everybody now at, we're at the institution where I am, or now retired from, the conversation that's going on is everybody's moving back to in-person exams and moving away from now allowing the use of technology on exams, because they've tried it with having 3 different people ask the same question right at about the same time. And you're right, the answers are not, you think, well, if they're all going to get the same answer, and then I'm going to be able to tell that they, cheated, just like I used to when people would copy from one another and you'd recognize, gee, I've seen that paragraph before. But they did get they got enough different that you wouldn't necessarily have said that it was copied. And so in a way, they're pushing back on technology. Yeah, Peter?
Yeah, I was going to say, it reminds me, I mean, first of all, I think it's kind of ironic because the SAT did away from the in-person essay for the most part, or at least schools have to elect it, so it's not being done so much now. That's going to seem like much more of an interesting thing to do. But it reminds me when I first saw computer algebra systems or saw people look up facts, because I used to be able to glance at something somebody wrote and just from the fluidity of it, you know, a bad fact or two, I could tell you whether it was good or bad without really looking at it very carefully. And now I can't. And then there were computer algebra systems and things like that. I am convinced we can ask good enough questions and look at the answers carefully enough that we can see what students know. And I agree with you that we have to do more stuff in person and see what people do even in class. I know, you know, with New Year's resolutions, you know, one of the things I did a few years ago was have people do stuff on whiteboards, standing in groups and things like that. So I could glance around and see what everyone was doing, and they could sort of see what each other were doing. And that was such a huge thing for me, getting a good idea of where each student was at in their head, as opposed to waiting till a test or a quiz or something like that, or that they answered a particular question. So I'm convinced we can handle it.
Yeah, Cynthia and Maggie have put some comments in the chat. Do you want to mention?
I don't mind to mention. So I don't necessarily have something that is classroom facing. I work in supportive teachers. And one of the things that we've been kind of having some discussions about are interdisciplinary connections. And so we were working recently with our reading and writing folks, and we used this activity of the most likely machine. And it's all about algorithms. And we just kind of tried to look at it through the lens of how is this engaging students in reading and writing? How is it engaging students in mathematics? Just and it's a most likely to. And so students are given kind of a fake class with people like Marilyn Monroe or Amelia Earhart or lots of different people, and Jackie Robinson, and they assign those people to 3 most likely awards, or most likely to get a scholarship to college, or most likely to, I don't know, get in trouble, or most likely to go viral. And then on the next screen, they're given all of these character traits, and they have to make their own algorithm for which of those character traits would fall into each of the most likely categories. And then for each of those categories, they get to shift the importance of each of those character traits and then run their algorithm and see if it picked the people that they assigned to those categories, and then go back through it. So it actually has a really cool step-by-step kind of student-facing thing. And so our collaboration was kind of to pull out where's the mathematics in this, and then where would we employ reading and writing, and kind of communicating what this is telling us, and kind of utilize those 2 tools together. So it was a really cool activity to kind of step by step through, and it was super user friendly.
Great, thanks. When you said most likely machine, my first thought was that you were showing them things that had been written, some of which had been written by the machine and some of which had been written by actual students, and asking them if they could identify the one that was written, but that was most likely written by the machine, because it reminded me of the activity that I often use to convince students that they shouldn't make up their, you know, when I ask them to simulate, because, you know, you do an activity where you have some students make up sequences of heads and tails, and some kids actually flip the coins, and then we you know, use it to show, well, I can tell this one was made up and this one was real, and this one was made up, this one was made up. And it kind of convinces them that I could, you know, tell if they made up something. I can't in that setting, I can't usually in other simulations, but, you know, it kind of made them think I could. So I figured they were less likely to do that. And I was wondering if you showed some real student work versus some machine work from answering the same question, And they can easily spot the difference if they would then think, oh, well, I better not do that on my tests or papers because they'll be able to tell. I don't know. It's interesting. So other thoughts on this or other things that you're trying in class that you'd like to share? Yeah, Mary?
They say right now that the writing of the chatbot is about a good 12th grader. So that's why college professors are finding it easier. But they're also saying that it doesn't sound human yet. Like it sounds like all of us have our own voice that we write in. So that's where they're picking it up. But in high school, I don't know if it would be harder to discover unless we do know. I don't know, because it's stats. So they write prompts, but I don't have whole papers to answer from. But yes, that's kind of cool, that project. That was Maggie. How long did it take to implement that, Maggie, that project you're saying? And what grade? It sounds like it was primary grades, but I'm wondering if it could be utilized higher.
No, I think, so the lesson is actually from Common Sense Media. I want to say it was 7th grade.
Okay.
And we kind of had this discussion about where would you kind of pull out the mathematics and how likely is it that we put this trait here, or so it wasn't necessarily designed, it was designed as a data science project more so than just a pure mathematics process, but it very much gets to the point where here's how I would assign these based on here's these characteristics and where I would rank them. Did it work? And then they can go back and retry it and start to like hone their algorithm to make it more and more accurate. And so I want to say that the original lesson was 7th grade, but I'll find it and put it in the chat for sure.
Well, you know what that's interesting about is that when Google first came up with like the AI facial recognition, they were so proud of their work. This is like 10 years ago. And then they were using it for hiring. And it started to look, someone started to look at it and say, well, you're not hiring any Black people. Like where are the people of color? So they went back to the algorithm, and it turned out that the algorithm, this is true. If you look it up, you'll find out it only could see Black people as a primate, as a gorilla or something. It didn't see it as human. So they were never getting hired. So it really was a huge embarrassment for Google, and they had to go back and rework their algorithm to try to start picking up different faces. Otherwise, it was just going to repeat history. So that's kind of like what I'm picking up here is that this project, this most likely machine thing, it's almost like superlatives when you're reading it, like who's most likely for this. And so our own bias, if we're not careful with this AI bot, we're going to just repeat all the bias and all the history that we've already had, because it's going to learn from us. It doesn't, and then it will take off. So this is where also I get a little confused, because we might need more government restrictions or something. Somebody's got to control this, because who's to say I can't just take it and start feeding it all sorts of negativity, and then it's going to start to learn history the way it was taught as it was always anglicized, as opposed to what maybe all the different sides. Everybody has their own perspective on life, So I don't know. That project's very interesting for a lot of reasons. I think we could work like the statistics based on the probabilities, maybe. I wish it was a little more developed for a stats class, because you could definitely do stuff like that with it. That's my thought on it, is that it could be used very interesting as a forewarning that with all this technology coming out, which we can't be afraid of, because it's here. It's not going away. We just have to work with it as opposed to against. It's not like catching it. It's like work with this. Yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, I think it part of first it talks about what an algorithm is, and then it talks about like the data. So when students are learning what is an appropriate way to collect data and what might not be as appropriate, there's some connections there. And we kind of brainstormed those connections. So there were a lot of others that people were like, oh, we could ask this question, or we could ask this. It's just interesting what you see kind of when you dig into it, but I'll look for the link to the lesson plan and put it in the chat.
Thanks. All right. Well, how about have other people tried other things? We have stories of changes you've made in your teaching, or that you hope to make in your teaching, and the kind of the New Year's resolution spirit of things.
I'm Lee. I joined a little late. Hi. So I teach at Moravian University, and I teach 2 sections of elementary statistics, the math for business majors and math for elementary teachers. So a variety of things. And I just started reading over winter break, Building Thinking Classrooms for Mathematics. It's a really, really great book. And I haven't been using it in stat so much because I already have activities that I use in stat that I think work well, but I'm definitely using it in my math for teaching class. It talks about visible random grouping. The fact that the research that several professors did showed that even when teachers said that they did random grouping, they didn't believe it was random. And that they needed to actually physically see the random grouping happening, whether that was with playing cards or, some kind of random name generator in the front of the room. And then that having them do problems on the board. So the vertical board, whether it's whiteboards or chalkboards, we have chalkboards. The fact that they can erase the visible non-permanent surfaces is what they call it, the V and PS. I could tell, like, when I told the students that, like, okay, this isn't for a grade, they were like, oh, okay, and that they would work together and that they look over at what other groups are doing. It's like, okay, I want them to they're not copying down everything that they're seeing. They're just copying down an idea here or there and then kind of building on that themselves. And I feel like for the math for teachers class, it's working. I just have to continue to implement it and refine it and finish reading the book so I make sure I'm doing everything that's recommended.
I like that book a lot too, and I had been doing random grouping before reading the book, but I did find that and when I read it, it was just around New Year's, and I said, I'm going to do it in all my classes, not just stats. I was doing it in stats just because I thought the more things I could do that used randomness, the better people would get a feeling for it. And when I did it in my algebra and some of my other classes, I got a lot of resistance. But so a lot of New Year's resolutions, I maybe try a little at New Year's, but then next year, I try them for good. When I introduce something on day 1 of a class and say, this is just how it all works, the students just go, oh, okay, that's this class. Whereas if I have, several months of a class and then I make a big change, they have trouble with that.
Yeah.
Maybe I do too. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's definitely harder to do that in the middle of the class. One thing that I'm taking away from this book that I might do different from my math for business class is they talk about student note taking. And the one thing I found interesting is that the students don't really understand who the notes are for sometimes, especially in high school classrooms. They think it's for the teacher, not for themselves. And a lot of times they'll just copy down what's on the board. They talk about live notes and dead notes. Live notes means they're kind of copying as they go along. So if the teacher writes something a little bit to the right, they'll write to the right, then they'll write back to the left or whatever. Whereas dead notes, it's on the board, but you don't really know the order and the flow of what happened. So it doesn't have as much sense to it. And so they talked more about the students kind of creating their own notes, after you're done with an activity or after you're done teaching the lesson, where it's just like a piece of paper where they can put down the things that make sense to them, whether it's a definition or an example or non-examples. And I feel like that is something I might need to do with my math for business class in the future, because right now a lot of them are just copying down what I'm writing. And I don't, for students, they can't necessarily copy and process at the same time. So if I'm talking and then writing and I'm done early and then I start talking again, they're still writing. So they're not able to hear what I'm saying because they're writing. They can't process both the writing and listening at the same time, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so I'm starting to be more aware of the fact that I need to give them time to write a little bit more than maybe I had in the past. Because I have a bad habit of talking and writing at the same time. I can actually talk and write at the same time. Students can't do that. They can't write and listen at the same time, a lot of them.
Are you getting kids who like want to just hold that screen? I want to take a picture of it. So they're not even taking the notes. They're just trying
Yeah.
to take pictures of it. I'm
Yeah.
like, well, you might as well just go in a textbook then, because you're not, what's the difference? You're just taking a picture. You don't own it at all. I hate that.
Yeah,
really
I today I gave a quiz and I said you can bring in a help sheet, and some of them copied, just like cut out the notes that they had taken before and glued it onto a piece of paper. And it's like, no, I think you need to like redo the question, make up a new one, do something different. Like that's just putting it there is not going to help you. But I didn't say that ahead of time, but I did see it on some of them. So I'll probably have to make a comment about how that doesn't have as much value.
Yeah, some of the study guides for students and things like that recommend that students take a half an hour after class to redo their notes, to rewrite their notes, because that's that second step that Lee was talking about, that, okay, they've written it down, but now I want to think about it and organize it in a way that makes more sense.
But I'm pretty sure most of the students don't even look at their notes from one class to the next, a lot of them, or use it as a reference or any of that. So, yeah, I mean, and the other thing is, it's like, okay, I've given you some practice problems, but I can't do a problem in class that's similar to every practice problem that you're going to get. Because some of the practice problems, I want them to be a little bit different, where you're going to have to think. And I can't, I don't know. It's challenging, because I think the students I teach, specifically in that math for business, which is really right now, we're just doing equations of lines. I think a lot of them say, but we didn't, they look at a question like this and say, well, we didn't have one like this, And so getting the students to understand how to solve problems when they don't have one that's just like this, that's the challenge, especially when they're just coming out of COVID and not having as strong of a math background as they maybe had in the past, that first year students.
Yeah. Thanks. Other things that people are trying or would like to comment on? Yeah, Michael?
Well, Lee, everything you're saying about not being able to take good notes, I think it all starts in second grade, frankly. I'm a dinosaur. I went to school in the 60s. And from second grade on, we had penmanship class. And the purpose was not necessarily to develop beautiful handwriting, but to develop fluent handwriting. So you wouldn't have to think at all about what you were writing. You could give all of your attention to the class. And by the time we were in junior high, we could take notes for film strips. You remember film strips? We could take our film strip notes in the dark. We didn't even need to see what we were writing on, because we were all fluent with our handwriting. And some of us had good handwriting and some of us had sloppy handwriting, but we all had fluent handwriting that we didn't have to think about one bit. And now today's students, they're keyboarding from such an early age that, oops, let me, my light timed out on me.
I think he needs a motion sensor light or something like that.
Yes, that's what it is. Sorry about that. But they're keyboarding from such an early age that they never develop handwriting fluency. And since there's no standardized test for handwriting, nobody really cares. But where it's impactful is not in history or English, because their longer themes there will always be type. It's impacting math, statistics, and the sciences, because they can't take notes. And when they take a test, it takes them twice as long as it should, because they, instead of being able to write and buffer the next line in their brain while they're still finishing the previous line, they have to alternate between thinking and writing. They cannot do both at the same time. And so they're literally 50% as fast as they could be if they had fluent handwriting. And I don't know what to do about this. I mean, until we have a standardized test for handwriting, nobody's gonna care. And you know, who thought that math would be a victim of bad handwriting? But it's absolutely true. I see it every day.
I remember reading a study about that, when the SAT, the essays, that when people wrote their answers in script compared to students that printed, you know, their answers that didn't have that fluency in script, that the students that were using script tended to score much higher than students that were printing out their letters. It's interesting.
Now, there's another lurking variable there, though, which is independent schools versus public schools, because more of the independent schools are still keeping cursive.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, handwriting, it's a fundamental basic skill, and it's been abandoned.
And you lose it. You lose facility. I struggle now sometimes writing cursive just because I don't do it enough. So yeah, Mary, you had a.
Yeah, I was going to say two things. One is I teach at a parochial school, and there are still nuns out there teaching these kids, so I can clearly see when I'm reading like a prompt.
I love it.
And I can, it's like, whoa, they have, it's like calligraphy. It's so perfect. And then you get like a public school kid who has come in. I'm like, oh, I can't even read this thing. So that's one thing. But the other thing I was going to say, and I don't know if we might be drifting out of stats, but maybe this leads to some kind of study, is my friend is a professor at a medical school, a surgical professor. And she said, the kids can no longer do anything like she said, don't get any surgeries because no one can sew, like the kids can't, they don't have finger strength. All they can do is game, you know? So if you have to get sutures, she's like, she said her third year students are like what her like first year students were. She has to teach them like little tiny yarn things because that's how weak their motor skills are. So that's that. Yeah. So don't get surgery from a young person, maybe get an old person.
Henry?
Michael, thank you for sharing about the handwriting thing, because like the quiz I gave today, I'm like, I took the quiz, of course I'm fluent in writing. I took my quiz and did my answer key and I'm like, I got it done in 3 minutes. You know, like 15 minutes should be plenty of time for them. Like 5 times, you know, 15 minutes should be plenty of time. I had some students that took like a half hour. And it was a 2-page quiz with 7 questions. And, you know, maybe some of it was the writing, but that's not something I had considered as a possible variable to, you know, to length of time to complete a quiz.
Oh, the other comment is, I'll keep it short, is that the students seem to think that the writing is for me, you know, showing the work is for me. They don't understand that writing is a way of supplementing their working memory so that they can do more. They don't see writing as a positive. They see it as a drag. And you know, without fluency in handwriting, I don't know how we'll ever persuade them otherwise, because it is a drag for them. It's a burden. It's an extra cognitive load that they can't really handle. And so they don't see it. I mean, I work things out with a pencil. That's what I was always taught. And until we have a non-proprietary system for doing math and stat on a computer, I don't see any alternative to the working it out with a pencil.
Henry, you've been.
One comment I have to make is Michael said he was a dinosaur because he went to school in the 60s. So what does that make me when I went to school in the 50s?
I'm there with you.
I can't really contribute to this chat in the same way I could about a year ago because I'm not teaching right now. But I did have something that happened yesterday that I thought a group like this would be interested in hearing. I went to a high school in northern Wisconsin, Clintonville High School. And the teacher there, Kevin Rees, who has participated in a couple of these chat sessions, did his second press conference with his students. And I've been working with him in trying to make this particular project work. And it was modeled after what I did when I was teaching at Rufus King High School in Milwaukee. But it was just an incredibly inspiring observation of student work. 4 groups of students presented their survey that they developed. They explained how they distributed the survey, collected the data, summarized it. They had beautiful graphs, and they were so passionate and so poised about trying to explain their work. The survey questions were essentially about their high school. It was very sad to hear some of the questions that they were asking, because it was clearly what is on the minds of teenagers nowadays. Essentially safety in school, guns in school, how comfortable they feel in school, those kind of attributes about the high school. And what was the high school doing? What I commend the high school in that they had the principal, they had board members come, and everyone sort of listened to number one, what their presentation was about, but also trying to make some sense of the data. And I think there's going to be a lot of discussion at board meetings and other adult events over this. So it's really very inspiring to see. The last little bit I'll add is that almost all of these kids were high-risk kids. Kevin indicated to me that he was actually worried 3 or 4 of them may not even graduate because they're talking about dropping out of school. But each of them had indicated to their teacher, Kevin, how this was one of the most meaningful classes, particularly in mathematics, that they had ever taken. And he was so hoping that the success that they were demonstrating yesterday would carry over so that they would continue. And I did too. It was a very delightful thing, even though it took 6 hours of driving and I got lost and the weather wasn't the best, but what I saw was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I know Henry's used that before, the idea, and it's always one that seemed really interesting to me, of having this kind of press conference when students are presenting their projects, where outsiders are invited to it. It could be their parents, or like you said, school board members or principals, or even, you know, you've had all kinds of different people come to those, and I think it makes it really real for the students. It's not, again, it's not just for the teacher, and it gives them really some motivation.
Inviting friends they want to impress is always a good thing. You know, anybody they want to invite.
When one of the years we did this at my school, we invited actually the TV stations and had little clips on the news. And the one I will quickly share that was one of the highlights of my career was we did a survey on asthma. And the interest in that was due to the fact that people thought that there was a way high case of asthmatic students in our school. So they wanted to sort of find out if kids knew about it, et cetera. So we did the survey on essentially things like, do you have a cat as a pet? Do you have carpeting, et cetera, et cetera? And all of the ways that those kids kind of work that data around the question of, do you have asthma or not, showed no major differences, except one question. And that one question ended up being written up in a major research report by the DNR of our state and so on. And the question was, do you have a family member in your house who smokes? And the answer to that question was overwhelmingly the asthmatic students said yes. And the non-asthmatic students said no. And that became kind of a significant piece for them to share in their research. So sometimes these are more than just, you know, casual likes and dislikes of your school.
So somebody asked in the chat about whether there's a rubric. Can you talk a little bit about how you graded these projects with the press conference?
Well, I can't find it right now. Kevin did have a rubric that he evaluated. He very much modeled it after GAZE. Each student had to present what was their statistical question that they were trying to investigate. The questions that they formed, most of them were answered with categorical data, just yes, no, and so on. He did encourage all the kids to at least think of 1, maybe 2 of 5 questions. That was the minimum required on their survey that had numeric answers, so that they would have a different set of graphs and ways of summarizing it. All of that was part of the rubric that was used to evaluate the study itself. But the basic premise was to present their statistical question, how they collected the data, whether they thought the collection process that they used gave them a good representation. And in most cases, they had to admit certain issues such as small sample size, over sampling of, let's say, seniors versus freshmen. And a few of them admitted that sometimes their encouragement of their friends to take the survey might have influenced that particular data collection. So it was an honest reflection on whether or not the data they collected they thought was really, let's say, valid and answering the question. And then they asked them at the very end, which is part of GAZE. So how do you think, this data addresses your STAG question? In most cases, what I really liked is almost all of the students said, gosh, now I wish we had asked these questions. So they almost all invariably had a series of other questions that they wished were included in the survey, or if they would do it again, they would consider adding to it. And I think there was something in the rubric that was used by Kevin to sort of inspire them to think on that.
So Mary asked about GAZE. So it's actually GAISE, and it's Guidelines for Assessment and Instruction in Statistics Education. If you go to the ASA website, in fact, I think Chris put a link in the chat to the GAZE report. And it's a free report from the American Statistical Association. And I'd also point, if you're interested in rubrics for things like the projects and press conferences, on the ASA website, amstat.org, there's also, they do a poster competition and a project competition each year, and there are rubrics for that they use to evaluate those posters and projects that might also be helpful in terms of the kinds of things that you could think about as you were assessing those.
I'll put that link in there in just a second.
Okay, great. Chris is doing a good job of keeping up with us and putting the links to things that people are talking about in the chat. Appreciate it. So, all right. Other thoughts? Thanks, Henry, for sharing that. It's other things that people are trying or want to try. Yeah, Mary.
Does anyone have a good way to, like, my honors kids can write beautifully about the statistics, but when I have the more CP and lower kids, they just write stuff like the mean is this, the median is it. It's like I try to encourage them to say, well, what does that mean? Like when you talk about a median, could you say like 50% or below that? Could you try to make it more readable instead of just like anybody could just read those numbers on a table? But do you guys have any way to encourage more fluid writing and reading when the kids are not at honors level? That's my question.
I'm going to take a stab at this. And mine is more of like trying to get them to write good questions for a project, but still, again, like, a good question, I just don't like, what is the mean? It's not a good question for a data analysis. Yes, you can find that. I have not found a lot of students able to do that. So I'm going to try to create a model for them, like an example of one. So that they're going to be doing a project for me where they have to find a data set on Kaggle and then use that and come up with some questions. And like I said, they don't know how to come up with good questions. So I think I need to model what good questions look like for them. We really need to practice that a little bit more. So I think modeling as much as possible.
I think I would add that sometimes we jump into the descriptive statistics or the questions about center and so on too quickly. And I encourage my kids to look at some already presented data. I would present them with 50 data items and ask some questions about what is this showing that, or how would you summarize this, or how is this population different than another population? Certain questions that necessarily did not focus on specific calculations just yet, but more of the overview of that data, and then ask them to consider something like that for their own. And I would complement, there's another resource ESA has, and that is a book that Chris wrote, co-authored about data science. And in that book, I think one of the strengths of it is they have a lot of questions for all kinds of grade levels about collecting what essentially would be some projects, and making and helping kids comment on that maybe before you actually turn them loose on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that adding the "and why do you care?"
Yes.
So what's the mean? They can't, but why do you care what the mean is? That they have to have some reason. So it's not, even with a data set, if you're providing the data set and they're going to pose a question, I want to know what's the question and why do you care what the answer is? Because that kind of forces them to talk about what it means. That helps sometimes too. Mary?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Oh,
Go ahead.
Meg.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, this is going to be off the wall. So you really might want to mute me, Roxy, or have your hand ready.
Okay. I got my button ready.
But Mary, I wonder, because you talked kind of about your high school students, if asking them to describe what they're seeing, if you could almost take an approach, like on social media, there was that trend where it's like, tell me you're this without telling me you're this. Like, tell me you're a teacher without telling me you're a teacher or something. And there are a lot of different things where they describe this, or they describe who they are without, I don't know, they come up with a different way of saying what they want to say. And if you did some of those with them, or showed them some examples and did that, and then said, okay, tell me about the data without telling me the data, or something like that, and just getting them thinking creatively about how they could say the things they want to say without being so straightforward about it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's clever. Anytime I can bring in their social media, then they get into it. And one thing I was going to say, Lee, or ask too, is like, I just had, these are high school kids, and the group that's working on this project, I got data from, I don't ever know how to say it, if it's Kaggle or Kaggle, not Kegel, that's exercises for pregnant women. Kaggle, that's it. So I went and I got the top 1,000 movies, and then I dumped it into a data set, and I manipulated it a little to clean it up, because these kids are not, they'll lose. If I don't have a new project for them, like every 10 days, the data is too stale. They can't even hold their mind to going any further. So I'm like constantly coming up with this stuff. But anyways, I printed it out, and then not printed it out, downloaded it. And then I sorted them into the genres, and I assigned each kid a genre, or they kind of jockeyed for positions for which genre. And then, since they already had the data, that's what they're working on right now, is looking at from, oh gosh, Kaggle, whatever you call it. You could get too much data. And that's what I was worried with my kids getting lost. And even with this, you could get lost. But so I limited it to revenue and date, the date the movie's made, the revenue that it produced, and the minutes. And right now, today in class, I thought it was the best thing, because they finally were making their graphs, and they could see a scatter plot of how long the running length of the movie was to the revenue made. And I said, well, what are you going to tell me about this? And then they would put their graph on the board, and they're like, it's dead quiet. I'm like, well, they're like, well, what do you want? I'm like, what do you see? Just tell me, like, I'm blind. I can't see the board. You tell me what I'm looking at. And then they started to talk about the outliers, or the points that were extreme. And I'm like, well, what does it mean? Like, or where all the points, because a lot of the movies are crunched down at the bottom, and it says, all right, they didn't run long, but they made enough money. There are these other ones that took a gamble and went really long and made either a ton of money or made like no money, And so I like that. I think that's good, but I do see what you're saying. It's like if I make them try to write it, they don't write what they're thinking. Maybe they don't take the time to think, but if I ask them to stop and think as if I can't see the board and describe what they're looking at, they're better able to do that than to try to write it down. That's all.
Yeah, it's kind of like the what's going on in this graph thing that the ASA and the New York Times does. Ask, they show them a graph, but what they ask is, what do you notice and what do you wonder, based on looking at this graph. So it's not, sometimes when they respond to the what do you notice, they say things like that aren't that interesting. About, well, there's a point here and a point there, but the what do you wonder kind of forces them to, to at least say, okay, well, here's a question that it's caused me to think about. And then they ask them to write a headline, write a title for the graph. They don't give the title. So what headline would you write if this was appearing in an article so they have to kind of summarize it that way as well. Yeah. Oh, so Peter's going to the Chat GPT.
Well, that was a question I was thinking when you were trying to say, what would you elicit from a student, and talking about that, I would say, when is a mean better? When is a median better? And I thought I'd ask Chat GPT, and I was not convinced it was answered by a human.
Interesting.
But it said a lot of things that you might want a student to say at one time or another, just not in response to that question.
All right.
See, this is my concern though, because I was going to do this project in class, but like even right now, oh no, now I got cleared. Before I was going to show you the message I get on my phone. It's like there's too many people on it. In the beginning, it never did that. But now there's there's too many people trying to access it. But now I got it. So I don't want to have this activity next week and then half the kids can't get access to it. Then it will just be a bad thing. So I'm trying to figure out what I can do to make sure that they'll be able to have unlimited access during the time we're together. I don't know. I got to
everybody come in at 6 a.m.
Yeah, Lincoln.
Yeah.
So. All right. Any other thoughts or comments or things you think you want to try? Anybody? Any thoughts or suggestions on what we might choose as a topic for our next chat next month? What's on your minds? Or maybe I'll just ask the chat bot what's a good topic for no.
Well, I've
Maybe-
been teaching a data science class for one semester, and I've got another crop of students for this semester. It's not a whole topic, but I could chat for 5 minutes on what I've learned about teaching data science.
Yeah, maybe we could have a chat on when you're teaching data science, how different is it than what are you doing differently compared to stat. Another thing that had come up was the proposal for a new AP math course that's been, I know, somewhat controversial, and I didn't know whether people were interested in talking about pros and cons of that. That was another thought that we had.
Which
AP
one?
math course was that?
Pre-cal or which one? Pre-cal or college algebra?
I think it's the college algebra that's actually on the table at the moment.
Actually, it's the AP pre-calculus.
Oh, is it AP?
Yeah,
Okay.
they actually have a course and exam description on the website.
Okay, then I got that backwards. So yeah, the AFP pre-calc, it's been somewhat, I know there's been some back and forth discussions on pros and cons, and potential impact on AP Stat and some other things like that. So that would be one possibility if that's of interest to.
I mean, if it's of interest to people, I attended the AP Pre-Calculus Symposium that the College Board had, that college people were invited to attend. And I can talk a little bit about the perspective and what was shared at that and what changes came out of that meeting, if that's something people are interested in.
Yeah, that would be great if you'd be interested in doing that. I was going to try and find somebody if we did that who had been there. I know a couple people who attended, but if we got somebody in our midst that's done that, that would be great.
Yeah, and I'm writing multiple choice questions for the exam, but I won't talk about those.
Okay. Oh, well, I can say that the answer to at least one of them is A, right?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah. So, right. So data science is one possibility. The AP pre-calc is a possibility. Other suggestions?
Yeah, I would be interested in seeing if anybody has games that help teach statistics and probability. I mean, I have one that I could suggest, but I'd be interested in more.
Mm-hmm.
I have a relic from the pandemic I could share with you, which is Jeopardy, statistics Jeopardy. It's the only thing. It's the only thing I ever found during the pandemic that actually worked well for a hybrid class.
Yeah, that could be a fun topic. So, all right. Okay, well, I think our time is just about up for today, but I want to thank all of you for coming, and we'll get something out. Chris will schedule something hopefully for February sometime, and we hope to see you all again then. And in the meantime, good luck. You want to say anything in closing, Chris?
No, this was a great discussion. Thank you so much. And Roxy and I will come up with a topic for next month, and Lee will probably be contacting you in terms of the AP pre-calculus. I know there's been some discussion here in Georgia about it in terms of how it kind of relates to our new math curriculum that we have here and the way the courses have been redesigned here in Georgia. So I think it's going to be an interesting topic.
Yeah, I would be glad to share some ideas.
That would be great. And we plan on having the chats on Wednesday this semester. We wanted to make sure, I know some people can't always make it on Thursdays, and so we're going to switch to Wednesdays this semester. So it's probably the same time at 4:30. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of the week.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Thank you.